The Mafia boss walked into a tiny flower shop. One little girl called him Daddy. A man who buried his heart 5 years ago just walked into a flower shop, and a 4-year-old girl looked up at him with his own eyes and said one word that shattered everything he thought he knew. The woman he loved, the woman he believed had chosen someone else, is standing 3 feet away holding a pair of garden shears, and she looks like she wants to use them on him. He came here for white lilies, for his dead mother. Instead, he found a daughter he never knew existed, a lie so large it swallowed years whole, and the realization that the man who handed him his empire is the same man who burned his entire life to the ground. Drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. The flower shop had no name on the sign. That was the first thing Roman Mercer noticed when the cab dropped him on the corner of Whitaker and Gaston, in the older part of Savannah, where the streets were still brick and the oak trees grew wide enough to block out whole sections of the afternoon sky. The sign above the door was just a painted board, deep green background, white lettering worn almost to nothing by 2 or 3 Georgia summers, and it read only flowers, like whoever made it couldn't be bothered to dress it up any further than that. Roman stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He had not slept in 31 hours. His shirt was pressed and his jaw was shaved because those were habits that didn't leave a man just because everything else had. But underneath that surface layer of control, there was a kind of hollow weight that had been sitting behind his sternum since the phone call 4 days ago, when his father's attorney had read the clause in his mother's will that asked specifically for white lilies at the memorial service, and Roman had realized, standing in his Chicago penthouse surrounded by everything money could arrange, that he had no idea where to find any. His assistant had found this place. Smallest shop with the highest rated stock in the county, apparently. Roman didn't care about ratings. He just needed flowers for a woman who deserved them, and he had maybe 40 minutes before the car came to take him back to the airport. He pushed the door open. The bell above it was soft, almost apologetic. The smell hit him first. Layered, complicated, the kind of green living smell that didn't exist in office buildings or boardrooms, or anywhere Roman had spent the last decade of his life. Eucalyptus and rosewater and something warmer underneath. Maybe freesia, maybe just the particular quality of morning light coming through the east-facing windows and landing on things that were still alive. Then the noise. Small feet on hardwood. Fast. He had just enough time to register movement at the edge of his vision before something small and determined collided with his left leg, both arms wrapping around his knee with the absolute confidence of a child who had never learned to second-guess her own momentum. Roman looked down. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, looked up at him. She had dark hair that hadn't been brushed yet today, and it was sticking out at angles that suggested she'd fought off whoever tried. She had one red sneaker and one blue one. Her shirt had a picture of a yellow duck on it, and there was a smear of something purple, probably marker, along her left forearm. She was missing one of her front teeth, and the gap made her smile lopsided in a way that should have been funny. It wasn't funny. Roman's chest did something he didn't have a word for. The little girl's eyes, dark brown, almost black, with that particular depth that makes some children look like they've been thinking hard about something since the moment they arrived in the world, stayed locked on his face with an expression of complete and uncomplicated delight. "Daddy," she said. Not a question, not uncertainty. The word came out of her the way children say words they've been waiting a long time to say out loud. Roman's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked up automatically, some instinct pulling his gaze toward the back of the shop, and that was when he saw her. Ivy Callahan had her back to the door. She was bent over a work table along the far wall, her hands moving through stems and wire with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done the same motion 10,000 times. Her hair was longer than he remembered, pulled back loosely, a few pieces escaping around her neck. She was wearing a canvas apron over a pale blue shirt, and her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and there was a streak of green on her forearm, soil or stem juice, and Roman stood completely still looking at the back of her head the way a man looks at something he'd convinced himself he'd imagined. "Lena, sweetheart, don't run at customers," Ivy said, not turning yet, voice carrying that automatic parental correction tone, slightly tired, slightly distracted. Then she turned. The flowers in her hand dropped onto the work table. One of them missed and fell to the floor, and neither of them moved to pick it up. For 4.5 seconds, nobody in the shop breathed. The little girl, Lena, was still holding Roman's leg with both arms, looking between the two adults with the calm scientific interest of someone watching something she doesn't fully understand but finds genuinely fascinating. Ivy's face went through 3 or 4 things in fast succession. Roman watched all of them. First there was shock, pure and physical, the kind that drains color. Then something harder behind it, recognition becoming something else, something that wasn't warmth. Then her jaw set, and her eyes went flat, and whatever had been on her face for that first half second locked away behind something controlled and cool and considerably more dangerous. "Lena," Ivy said. Her voice was steady, deliberately steady. "Come here, please." Lena did not come. She looked up at Roman again with that same expression, complete, uncomplicated certainty, and said it again, softer this time, almost to herself. "Daddy." Roman crouched down. He didn't plan to. His knees bent and he went down to her level, and he was close enough now to see that her eyes were not exactly the color he'd first thought. They were very dark brown, but there was something in them, some quality of the iris, that he recognized the way you recognize a street you used to drive as a kid. Something structural, something that lived in the bone. "Hey," he said. His voice came out quieter than he expected. Lena studied his face with the thorough seriousness of a child who is doing an actual assessment. Then she reached up and put one small hand flat against his jaw, the way children sometimes do when they're trying to understand something through touch. Roman held absolutely still. Then Ivy was there. She crossed the shop faster than he'd registered her moving, and she put her hands on Lena's shoulders, gentle but firm, and drew her back 2 steps. "She does that," Ivy said. Her voice was controlled, but there was something in it, some frequency underneath the words, that Roman could hear even now. "She's 4. She calls men daddy sometimes. It doesn't mean anything." Roman stood up slowly. He looked at Ivy. She was looking back at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, and that was new because there was a time when Ivy Callahan had been the one person on earth whose face he'd understood completely. "Ivy," he said, "don't." She said it quickly, almost reflexively, like it was a word she'd practiced. "I just need—" "White lilies are in the left cooler, 3rd shelf." Her voice dropped back into professional neutral, like a door slamming shut. "Take what you need. I'll ring you up at the register." Roman didn't move toward the cooler. He stood in the middle of the flower shop with the morning light coming through the windows and the smell of living things all around him, and he looked at the little girl who was now standing slightly behind Ivy's leg, watching him with those eyes, and something shifted in the architecture of his chest in a way that he recognized as the feeling he got right before something very large and very significant changed forever. That was when he noticed the locket. It was small, silver, hanging on a thin chain around Lena's neck, nestled against the yellow duck on her shirt. An oval pendant, no bigger than a thumbnail, with a pattern of engraved vines along the edge that were not a standard jeweler's pattern. Because there was no standard jeweler's pattern. He had made that pattern himself. Sitting in his mother's sunroom 8 years ago with a small engraving tool and a piece of silver and a specific kind of patience that had been one of the only quiet things he'd ever allowed himself. He had given it to Ivy the night before everything fell apart. He had pressed it into her hand in the dark outside the hotel where they'd been keeping their relationship secret from both their families, and he'd told her it was one of a kind, and he'd meant it, and he'd been right. There was not another locket like that one in the world. Roman's vision narrowed. He looked from the locket to Ivy's face. She had seen him see it. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a small tightening, some defensive reorganization happening below the surface. "Ivy?" he said, and his voice came out different this time, stripped of whatever careful social layer it usually operated under. "You need to go," she said. "That's my locket. The lilies are $3.50 a stem. 3rd cooler on the left." She moved toward the register. "Ivy." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "How old is she?" The shop went quiet except for the ambient hum of the coolers and the distant sound of traffic outside. Lena had found a small toy near the window, a wooden flower on a stick, and was twirling it between her palms, apparently having lost interest in the adult drama unfolding 6 feet away with the complete indifference of someone who has not yet learned that silence can be heavy. Ivy stood at the register. Her hands were flat on the glass countertop, and she was looking at them rather than at him. "I want you to leave," she said, still controlled, still professional. But there was something in the words now, something underneath them that had more weight. "I'm not leaving." He said it without heat, just as a statement of fact. "Tell me how old she is." A long silence. 4, Ivy said. "She's 4 years old. In November she'll be 5. Roman did the math. He'd known she would. He stood in the middle of a flower shop in Savannah, Georgia, 40 minutes from an airport, holding a set of calculations that rearranged every single thing he thought he'd understood about the last 5 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. Ivy's head came up fast. The controlled professional expression cracked, and what was underneath it was not soft. It was the kind of anger that has had years to compress itself into something dense and specific and sharp at every edge. "Why didn't I tell you?" She repeated it back at him like she was testing the weight of something absurd. "You want to stand in my shop and ask me that?" "Yes." She laughed. It was short and not funny, and it had no warmth in it at all. "I sent you letters, Roman, 3 of them. To the Chicago address, to the New York address, to the attorney your father used because I didn't have any other way to reach you. I was 7 weeks pregnant and I had nothing, and I wrote 3 letters. She stopped, breathed, her jaw was tight. "The only thing I got back was a photograph." "A photograph of what?" "Of you." Her voice dropped, stripped of the anger for a moment, leaving something rawer underneath. "At an engagement party, in the Mercer Estate ballroom, standing next to a woman in a white dress with your arm around her and a caption on the back that said, 'Congratulations to the couple in your assistant's handwriting.'" Roman stared at her. The coolers hummed. Outside, a car passed. "I was never engaged," he said. "Don't." The anger came back, hotter now, more precise. "Don't you dare stand in front of me and say that." "Ivy." He took 1 step toward her. She didn't back up, but something in her stance changed, a bracing, a preparation. "I was never engaged to anyone. I didn't receive any letters. I spent 8 months after you disappeared trying to find you, and then my father told me you'd left the country and I—" He stopped. The next part was harder to say. "I believed him. I shouldn't have. I believed him, and I stopped looking, and that is the thing I'm going to spend the rest of my life on. But I need you to hear me right now when I tell you I never stopped." "Stop." Her voice cracked. She pressed it back together quickly. "Stop it. You don't get to do this." "Somebody lied to both of us," Roman said. "You need to leave. I need 5 minutes. You need to leave before I call someone." "Call who?" He said it without cruelty. Just the flat reality of what they both knew about who he was and what circles he moved in. "Ivy, listen to me. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to take anything. I walked into this shop because I needed flowers for my mother's memorial, and I found—" His voice broke slightly on the next word, the first real fracture in the surface of him. "I found her. I need you to let me understand what happened." Ivy looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Lena, who was still twirling her wooden flower, completely unconcerned with the world of adult devastation happening around her. 10 minutes, Ivy said. Her voice had gone quiet and flat and somewhere beyond anger, into a territory that was harder to name. "Lena goes in the back room to watch her show. 10 minutes. And then you leave, and I have your word, whatever that still means, that you don't come back without warning." "You have my word," Roman said. Ivy nodded once. She came out from behind the counter and crouched down in front of Lena and said something low that Roman couldn't hear, and Lena looked at him one more time over her mother's shoulder with those eyes that held something Roman was only now beginning to understand, and then Ivy was guiding her through a door in the back wall, and the door clicked shut. The shop was quiet. Roman stood in the middle of it with his hands loose at his sides, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt completely outside whatever he'd prepared himself for. When Ivy came back, she didn't offer him a seat. She stood by the work table, and he stood near the door, and the morning kept coming through the windows, and neither of them moved toward the other. "Talk," she said. He told her what he could in 10 minutes. He gave her the facts the way you give someone facts, when there's no good way to frame them. Flat and sequential, and without the softening that would have felt dishonest. He told her about the 8 months of searching, about his father's claim that she had left voluntarily, about the complete disappearance of every contact point he'd had for her, about the version of events he'd been handed and had, eventually, exhausted himself fighting against. Ivy listened with her arms crossed and her face closed, and she did not interrupt. When he stopped, she was quiet for a moment. "The photograph was real," she said. "I could see it was you." "I don't doubt that. You had your arm around her." "I need to know whose event it was, what the date on the photo said." Something shifted in her face. "March, about 5 years ago, almost exactly." Roman was quiet. March, 5 years ago. He ran through it. Chicago, mostly. One trip to New York for a meeting with 3 of his father's trade contacts. A dinner his brother Damien had organized. Some kind of quarterly business celebration at the Mercer estate. Spouses and partners invited. Roman had attended for less than an hour. There had been photographs. He remembered a woman standing next to him for one of those photographs. A business contact's wife, or daughter, or someone Damien had introduced with a name Roman had immediately forgotten. He remembered shaking her hand. He remembered thinking the event was pointless and leaving early. Someone had used that photograph. Someone had written on the back of it. Someone who had access to the Mercer estate, to the events that happened inside it. Someone who had known about Ivy, who had known about the letters, who had been in a position to intercept mail and fabricate an engagement narrative and redirect every trail Roman might have followed back to her. The list of people with that level of access was not long. At the top of it was a single name. Roman kept his face still. He was very practiced at keeping his face still. "I need to go," he said. Ivy blinked. "What?" "I'll be back this evening. I need to make some calls first. I need to—" He stopped, reorganized. "I need you to not go anywhere today. Can you do that?" Her expression shifted into something colder. "I'm not going to sit in my shop waiting for you to decide what you need from me, Roman." "That's not what I—" He breathed. "Ivy, if I'm right about what happened, then the person who arranged this is still in a position to cause damage. I need to understand the scope of it before I walk back in here and tell you something I'm not certain of yet." She stared at him. "Are you telling me someone in your family did this?" she said. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Ivy unfolded her arms slowly. Her expression was different now. Not warm, not close to forgiving, but the quality of her suspicion had changed slightly, some small gear shifting somewhere in the mechanism of it. 10 minutes is up," she said. "I know. Take your lilies." He moved to the cooler. His hands were steady. His chest was doing things he was choosing not to examine right now. He took 8 stems and brought them to the register and paid in cash because he still operated in cash when he could help it, and Ivy wrapped them in paper without speaking. At the door, he stopped. "The locket," he said. "She wears it every day?" Ivy's hands went still on the paper. "I put it on her when she was born. I thought she should have something of—" She stopped herself. "Yes, every day." Roman nodded. He pushed through the door. The bell above it made its small, apologetic sound. The brick sidewalk was warm under his shoes, and the oak trees overhead were throwing shade across the street in long, slow patterns. And the city around him was going about its morning with complete indifference to the fact that everything he understood about the last 5 years had just been rearranged into a shape he barely recognized. He walked 2 blocks before he took out his phone. The call connected on the second ring. "I need Marcus and Cole in Savannah by tonight," Roman said. "And I need everything. Receipts, travel records, correspondence logs, going back 5 years. Everything connected to Damien's office." A pause on the other end. Then, "How far back?" 5 years and 3 months, Roman said. "March. Start there." He hung up and kept walking. He did not look back at the flower shop. He didn't need to. He could still see it. The green sign, the east-facing windows, the bell above the door. He could still see Lena with her mismatched sneakers and her wooden flower and the locket resting against the yellow duck on her chest. He could still see his own eyes looking back at him from a 4-year-old's face. Whatever Damien had done, whatever the full shape of it was, Roman was about to learn it from the inside out. And when he did, the reckoning was going to be of a scale that his brother had clearly never accounted for. Because Damien had made every calculation about Roman based on who Roman used to be. He had not made any calculations about what Roman would become the morning he found out he had a daughter. By the time the sun cleared the oak canopy and fell full and flat on the Savannah streets, Roman Mercer was already 3 phone calls deep into something that could not be undone. And back in the flower shop on Whitaker Street, Ivy Callahan stood at her work table and looked at the stems he hadn't touched, the small mess he'd left near the door, the ghost of a conversation that had cracked something open in her chest that she'd spent 4 years cementing shut. Lena came back through the door from the back room. She looked around the shop, took in her mother's expression with that serious, assessing gaze. "Is the man coming back?" she asked. Ivy picked up her shears, put them down, picked up a stem that didn't need trimming and trimmed it anyway. "I don't know, baby," she said. Lena went back to her window, back to her wooden flower, back to her private, uncomplicated world where people were simply either present or absent, and absence was the only real loss. But Ivy stood at her table with her hands moving through motions her body knew by heart and her mind somewhere else entirely, running through the implications of what Roman had said, what he hadn't said, the careful way his face had gone still when she'd said the word family. And for the first time in 4 years, she felt something she'd spent 4 years training herself not to feel. The terrible, unwelcome, specific possibility that she might have been wrong about which direction the betrayal came from. She pressed the thought down, wrapped it in the same practice nothing she'd learned to use on harder things. But it stayed. The investigation Marcus ran took 72 hours. Roman spent those hours in a rented room on the 3rd floor of a quiet inn 4 blocks from the flower shop, and he did not sleep more than 90 minutes at a stretch. He sat at the small desk by the window with his laptop open and his phone face up on the wood beside it, and he worked through what came in the way he'd always worked through hard information, methodically, without flinching, reading each document twice before moving to the next one. Marcus sent the first batch at 11:30 on the night of the same day Roman had walked into the shop. 12 files. Financial records, travel manifests, correspondence logs pulled from servers that Roman technically no longer had authorization to access, though Marcus had never operated on the assumption that authorization and capability were the same thing. Roman opened the first file. By the 3rd file, he was no longer sitting. He was standing at the window with the laptop on the sill and his hand pressed flat against the glass and the nighttime Savannah street below him going about its quiet business, completely unaware. By the 6th file, his jaw ached from how hard he was holding it. By the 12th, he understood the full shape of it. Not all the detail, not every mechanism, but the shape, the architecture of what had been done and who had done it, and approximately when each piece had been moved into position, was clear enough that Roman sat back down in the chair and spent a long time looking at the far wall and doing something he almost never did, which was allowing himself to feel the weight of something before deciding what to do about it. Damien had been methodical. That was the thing Roman kept coming back to, sitting in that room in the dark. His half-brother had been so methodical about it, not reckless, not impulsive, patient, architectural. The kind of long-game planning that required believing completely that the person you were dismantling would never figure it out. The engagement photograph had been taken at a Mercer Estate event on March 14th, approximately 5 years ago. Roman's calendar from that period, which Marcus had pulled from a backup server Damien had apparently not known existed, showed he'd attended for 55 minutes and left before the dinner portion. The woman in the photograph was a trade associate's daughter named Claire something, and there was no record of any arrangement between them anywhere, because there hadn't been one. But Damien had pulled that photograph from the estate's private archive. He'd had someone write on the back of it in a handwriting that was close enough to Roman's assistant's script to pass a quick examination. He'd had it physically mailed, not emailed, mailed, with a Savannah postmark because someone local had sent it, someone Damien had access to in this city, to an address in Savannah, Georgia. Ivy's address. Which meant Damien had known about Ivy, had known where she was, had known about the pregnancy, or had suspected it, which was the same thing in terms of motivation. Roman thought about that for a long time. He thought about the 3 letters Ivy had said she'd sent. He had Marcus check the mail logs from the Chicago and New York properties for that period, and the results came back inside an hour. There were gaps, not obvious ones, not the kind of gap that would stand out unless you were specifically looking for it, specifically asking whether letters from a particular sender had arrived during a particular window. But they were there. Mail had come through the Chicago property during those months. The household logs showed it received and sorted. And then certain items simply ceased to appear in the detailed record that should have followed, because Damien had access to both properties during that period. He'd been helping Roman manage the transition of several business holdings while their father's health declined. He'd had every legitimate reason to be in and out of both buildings, to interact with mail staff, to request certain items be held or redirected. He had done exactly that. Roman looked at the final document Marcus had sent, a financial transfer record from 5 years ago, a relatively small amount, moved through 3 intermediary accounts, and ultimately landing with a private postal company in Savannah. Payment for a service. No description. The timing was exact. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a while longer. Then he picked up his phone and sent Marcus 3 words. Stay in town. He did not go to the flower shop the next morning. He waited until the afternoon, until Savannah had settled into that particular post-lunch quiet that the city did in summer. Slower foot traffic, longer shadows, the heat thick enough that people moved through it deliberately. And then he walked the 4 blocks and pushed through the door with the apologetic bell. Ivy was alone. Lena was apparently not there, which Roman would find out later meant she was at a neighbor's house 2 doors down, where a retired school teacher named Mrs. Patterson watched her on Tuesday afternoons while Ivy managed deliveries. He didn't know that yet. He just registered the absence and felt something loosen slightly in his chest. Not relief exactly, but less pressure. Ivy looked up when he came in. She'd been expecting him, he could tell. Her posture was different from yesterday. Still guarded, but the surprise was gone. She'd had time to prepare. You said you'd call first, she said. I said I'd be back in the evening. It's evening. It's 4:30. Close enough. She set down what she was working on, wiped her hands on her apron, looked at him with an expression that said clearly she was going to hear what he had to say, and she was not going to make it easy. He told her about Damien. He gave her the same facts the same way. Flat, sequential. But this time there was more of them, and they were more specific, and he watched her face as he laid them out one at a time, watched the way she processed each piece of information with a careful, almost suspicious attention, like someone checking the seams of something to see if it would hold. She didn't interrupt until he got to the financial transfer. That's a bank record, she said. How do you have a private bank record from 5 years ago? I have people who are good at finding things. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. Do you want an answer about how, or do you want to keep going with what I found? She was quiet for a second. Her jaw moved slightly, some small internal negotiation. Keep going, she said. He finished. He laid out the full shape of it as cleanly as he could, and when he was done, the shop was quiet and Ivy was looking at the floor 3 feet in front of her with her arms folded. Not in anger now, but in the particular posture of someone trying to hold themselves very still, while something large and difficult moves through them. So he knew, she said. Not a question. About you. About where you were. Almost certainly about the pregnancy at some point. And he just... She stopped. He needed me destabilized, Roman said. I was the primary heir. My father was sick. The transition was coming. Damien is a half-brother. Different mother, different standing in the family structure. If I was focused and intact and had a reason to want the legitimate side of the business dissolved, he'd never get control, Ivy said. Right, she breathed. So I was a liability to his plans. You were the thing that might have made me choose differently. He said it without ornament, just the fact of it. He knew that. He's always understood that about me better than I did. Ivy unfolded her arms. She moved to the work table and stood behind it with both hands on the edge and looked at him across the width of the shop. Why are you telling me this now? You've had this for, 3 days? You could have come here with documentation. You could have sat me down and shown me the records. I wanted to understand it fully before I put it in front of you. Or you wanted to figure out how to present it so I'd believe you. The air between them went taut. That's fair, Roman said. Both things can be true. Ivy looked at him for a long moment. Some of the tension in her face didn't ease, but it shifted, reorganized into something more complicated and less purely defensive. I believed that photograph for 5 years, she said. I built everything, this shop, this life, on the assumption that you had chosen something else, that you had looked at your options and decided I wasn't one of them. Her voice was controlled, but the edges of it were ragged, the way cloth gets when it's been pulled too many times in too many directions. I told myself a story about what kind of man you were, and I believed it because I needed something to be angry at instead of just... She stopped. Instead of nothing. I know, Roman said. You don't get to just walk back in here and show me documents and expect me to... She stopped again. I have a daughter. I have a life here. I spent 4 years building something that works without you in it, and now you're standing in my shop telling me the foundation of all of it was a lie someone else constructed, and I'm supposed to... What? What is it exactly you want from me, Roman? He was quiet for a moment, then, nothing you're not ready to give. I want to know my daughter. I want to understand what happened. I want... He paused. I want you to be safe. That's the most immediate thing right now. Safe from what? From Damien. Ivy went still. He doesn't know you're here, she said. He knew where you were 5 years ago. He had people in this city. I don't know if he's maintained that or not, which means I don't know what he knows currently. When he finds out I've been here, does he know you're in Savannah? Not yet. How long before he does? Roman said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Ivy breathed. It was a long, controlled breath, the kind that takes effort to make look natural. So what you're telling me is that you showed up here and started digging, and now your brother might find out about it, and we might be in danger because you... I would have been here regardless. I walked into this shop by accident, Ivy. I wasn't following a lead. That doesn't make it better. No, he said. It doesn't. She turned away from him, moved to the east window. The afternoon light was going golden, and she stood in it for a moment with her back to him, and he watched the way her breathing looked from behind, the way her shoulders moved with it, and waited. I want to see the records, she said. All of them? The photograph one, the one where he paid someone. She turned back around. Her face was set. I want to see it myself. He pulled out his phone and found the image Marcus had sent, the financial record, clean and time-stamped, and held it out. Ivy came around the work table and stood close enough to take the phone from his hand, and she looked at the document with the careful, slow attention of someone who does not want to be fooled again and is checking every detail. She handed the phone back. Her face didn't change much, but something in her eyes did, some small, specific thing, like a mechanism releasing. I need time, she said. How much? I don't know. More than this conversation. She moved back around the table. Lena will be home in an hour. I need you to not be here when she gets back. Ivy? She asked about you this morning, Ivy said. Her voice was even. She woke up and asked if the man with the dark eyes was coming back. And I didn't have an answer for her, and I'm not giving her answers until I have some myself. She looked at him directly. Go back wherever you're staying. Give me until tomorrow. Roman looked at her. Then he nodded. I'll have someone on the street tonight, he said. Excuse me? Not visible. You won't see them, but you need to not put surveillance on my home. It's not surveillance, it's Roman. Her voice came down on his name like a hand on a table. I have lived in this city for 4 years, and nobody has touched us. I don't want men I don't know standing outside my house. He understood the argument. He understood it completely, and she was not wrong about any part of it. He also understood what Damien was capable of, and what the timeline might look like once word got back, and those two understandings were in direct conflict. One person, he said. Marcus. You've never met him, but he's been with me for 8 years. He's not the kind of man who causes problems. He just watches. That's all. A long silence. One person, Ivy said. And they stay on the street, not the alley, not the back. The street. The street, Roman agreed. He left before Lena got home. He walked back to the inn and called Marcus and gave him the address and told him to stay visible enough that Ivy could see him from the window if she needed to, but not so visible that he'd make the neighbors call anyone. Marcus said he understood. Roman went upstairs and sat at the desk again and opened the laptop and started building a picture of Damien's current operation, what he controlled, who reported to him, where the real power centers of the Mercer organization now lived. His father had died 8 months ago. In those 8 months, Damien had moved fast, consolidating, restructuring, pulling the outer organization tighter around himself. Roman had let it happen because he'd been exhausted and grieving, and because dismantling his father's empire had felt, in the immediate aftermath of loss, like a fight he didn't have the energy to pick. He was no longer exhausted. The picture that emerged from the next 4 hours of research was not a small one. Damien had expanded south during his consolidation. New shipping arrangements along the Georgia and Florida coasts, new relationships with port authorities in 2 cities, new money moving through legitimate real estate acquisitions in several historic southern markets, including Savannah. Roman found the property record at 11:17 at night. A commercial holding company with a name that meant nothing until Marcus, who Roman had called the moment he saw it, ran it back 3 shell layers and found Damien's fingerprints on the 4th. The holding company owned 4 properties in Savannah. One of them was directly across the street from a flower shop on Whitaker Street. Roman looked at that line in the document for a long time. Then he called Marcus. "The building across from the shop," Roman said. "The one with the green awning." "I'm looking at it right now," Marcus said. "Who's been in and out today?" A pause. "Nobody unusual. Building looks commercial, ground floor is vacant. Upper 2 floors, I'd need to get closer to tell you." "Don't get closer tonight. Just watch." He hung up and sat with the information and let himself understand what it meant. Damien owned a building across the street from where Ivy worked. That was either an extraordinary coincidence or it wasn't. And Roman had stopped believing in extraordinary coincidences somewhere around the age of 17, when he'd first understood what business his family was actually in. Damien had known where Ivy was for 5 years. He had not acted against her directly, which meant he had calculated that she was more useful as insurance than as a threat. A woman living quietly in Savannah with a child, no connection to the Mercer organization, no ability to damage Damien's position. She was not a problem. She was a lever, something that could be used if Roman ever got too close to the truth. And now Roman was in Savannah, which meant Damien would know, possibly already knew, that the lever was no longer sitting safely in a drawer. Roman picked up his phone again. He called a number he hadn't called in almost 3 years. A woman named Elaine, who had worked for his father's legal team and who Roman had kept a private line to since his father's health started failing, because Elaine was one of the few people in the entire network who answered to no one inside the family. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Roman? I need you to run a legal flag," he said. "Quiet. Nothing filed yet, just a preparation." "On what?" "On everything connected to Damien Mercer's control of the organization. I need it documented. I need it in a form that could go to federal investigators if required." A silence. Then, "That's a significant thing to ask. I know what I'm asking. If you file this kind of documentation, it's not something you can walk back. Your family's entire—" "I know," Roman said. Another silence. Longer. "I'll need 3 days," Elaine said. "You have 2. He hung up. He looked at the ceiling of the rented room and thought about Lena with her mismatched sneakers and her wooden flower. He thought about Ivy standing in the afternoon light with her back to him and her shoulders moving with the effort of controlled breathing. He thought about 5 years of letters that never arrived and a photograph with writing on the back and a carefully constructed absence that had been designed to look like abandonment. He thought about the building across the street with the green awning. His phone buzzed. "Marcus." Light came on. "2nd floor, east window, 20 minutes ago. Went dark again just now." Roman read it twice. "Stay there," he typed back. "Call me if anything moves." He set the phone down, sat in the dark with the window open and the Savannah night coming through it, warm and heavy, and the knowledge settling into him that whatever this had been, a quiet investigation, a personal reckoning, a man trying to understand the shape of what had been taken from him. It was no longer any of those things. Damien had a building across the street from Ivy's shop, and a light had come on in it tonight, the same night Roman had walked in and started asking questions. Whatever window had existed for this to resolve quietly, for Roman to build his case slowly and carefully and legally, and at a distance from the woman and child he'd found by accident in a Savannah flower shop, that window was closing. He could feel it closing the way you feel. Weather change before you can see it, a shift in pressure, a particular quality to the air, the specific stillness that comes right before something breaks. He picked up the phone again and called Marcus back directly this time, not a text. "Get Cole down here," he said, the moment Marcus picked up. "Tonight, and tell him to bring—" The second call hit his phone before he finished the sentence. Unknown number, Georgia area code. Roman looked at it for 1 second. Then he answered. The voice on the other end was smooth and even and carried the particular quality of someone who has had a very long time to practice sounding comfortable. "Little brother," Damian Mercer said, "I hear you're enjoying Savannah." Roman didn't say anything for 3 full seconds. He counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. While the sound of Damian's voice settled into the room the way smoke settles, finding every corner, taking up space without permission. "Damian," he said, "you sound surprised." The smoothness in his brother's voice was the particular smoothness of someone who has had a very long time to practice sounding comfortable. Not natural ease. Constructed ease. Roman had grown up listening to that voice across dinner tables and in hallways and in the back seats of cars, and he had always known the difference, but he had spent years telling himself it didn't matter. "I'm a little hurt by that. You've been in my city for 3 days. Your city? A figure of speech." A pause. "Mostly." Roman stood up from the desk. He moved to the window without thinking, looking down at the street, and he could see Marcus's silhouette 40 yards away near the corner and the dark face of the building across from the shop and the second-floor window that had gone dark 20 minutes ago. "What do you want?" Roman said. "To talk, that's all. 2 brothers who haven't seen each other in 8 months. One of them decides to take a vacation in Georgia without mentioning it." Another pause. Lighter this time. Performative. "I got worried." "You don't worry about me." "That's not entirely true." The lightness dropped slightly. Just slightly. "I worry about the things you might do when you're operating on incomplete information. That's a very specific kind of worry, Roman. It keeps me up at night." Roman kept his voice flat. "What information do you think I'm missing?" "I think you found some documents, old financial records, some travel logs." A beat. "I think someone showed you a photograph you've been misinterpreting." "Misinterpreting? Context matters. You know that. You've always been good at the big picture. Better than me, honestly, I'll give you that. But when something hits close to home, you lose that. You get narrow." The voice on the other end shifted again. Something underneath the smooth surface now, something harder. "You're being narrow right now." Roman looked at the dark window across from the shop. "Tell me the context I'm missing." "Not over the phone." A pause. "Come to the estate property on Skidaway. Tonight. We can sit down like adults, and I can show you what you're not seeing." "You want me to drive to a property you own, at night, alone." "Bring whoever you want. I'll come alone. You bring your people. I'll have dinner sent in. This is a conversation, Roman. That's all I want." Roman said nothing. "She's not what you think she is," Damian said. Roman's hand tightened on the phone, a small movement, almost nothing. "Don't. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to show you something before you make a decision that burns everything down based on a version of events that has some significant gaps in it." The voice went quieter, more careful, like something being handled with attention to its weight. "Come to Skidaway. 11 o'clock. If you hear what I have to say and you still want to walk away from everything, I won't stop you. You have my word." "Your word," Roman said. "I know. I know what you think of that right now." A long pause. "Come anyway. For your mother's sake, if not mine. She would have wanted us to at least talk." The call ended. Roman held the phone for a moment. Then he set it on the desk and stood very still in the center of the rented room and let himself think about what had just happened with the specific, careful attention that the situation required. Damien had called from a Georgia number. He had known Roman was in Savannah within 72 hours of Roman's arrival, which meant he had a contact here. Not just the property, but a person. Someone watching. Someone who had seen Roman go into the shop, or come out of it, or both. He had mentioned the photograph first, which meant he'd known about the photograph, known it was out there as evidence, which meant he had anticipated that Roman might eventually find it or be told about it. He had said, "She's not what you think she is." Roman turned that sentence over, examined it from several directions. It was designed to create doubt. That was its purpose, obvious and deliberately so. Damien had never been subtle about his manipulations with Roman because he'd never had to be. Roman's specific weakness had always been a certain kind of loyalty, the kind that made him want to believe the best of the people he was close to, and Damien had spent 20 years learning exactly how to use that. The question was what specifically he was pointing at. Roman called Marcus. "The Skidaway property," he said. "Damien owns it. I need everything you can get me in the next 2 hours. Layout, access points, how many people he's had there in the last month." "He called you," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Are you going?" Roman looked at the window, the street below, the corner where Marcus stood. "I'm thinking." "Roman." Marcus's voice was careful in the way it got careful when he was about to say something he knew wouldn't land well. "If he knows you're here and he's inviting you to a property he controls, I know what it could be. Then, I also know what it could be if I don't go. I need the layout. 2 hours." He hung up and sat back at the desk and opened the laptop again and started looking at Damien's Savannah holdings from a different angle. Not the financial structure this time, but the physical geography. Where the properties sat. How they related to each other. What kind of operation you could run from this city if you had the right access points along the coast. At 12 minutes past midnight, Ivy called him. He hadn't given her his number. He stared at her name on the screen. She must have taken it from his contact with Marcus, he thought, or Marcus had given it to her, which meant something had prompted her to need it. He answered. "There's a man on my street," she said. Her voice was low and controlled in the way it got controlled when she was frightened and refusing to show it. Not Marcus. Someone else. On the other side of the street, near the building with the green awning. He's been there for 40 minutes. Roman was already standing. "Is Lena? She's asleep. She's fine." "Roman, who is this person?" "Stay inside. Lock the back door if it isn't already. I'm coming." "You don't need to, I'm coming," he said. 10 minutes. He ended the call and grabbed his jacket and was out the door in 40 seconds. Marcus met him at the corner. The man near the building with the green awning was gone by the time they arrived. 8 minutes from the call, and the spot was empty, just a patch of sidewalk that still held the warmth of someone having stood there. Marcus walked it anyway, checking the doorway of the building, the edge of the awning, the recessed entrance to what appeared to be a vacant ground-floor commercial space. "Side door's been opened recently," Marcus said. He wasn't touching anything, just looking. "Scrape on the frame, fresh." Roman looked at the building. Second-floor window, dark. The whole face of it closed and blank in the way buildings get when they're being used for something other than what they appear to be. "He put someone on her before he called me," Roman said. "Looks like." "Which means the call was meant to pull me out of range." Marcus said nothing, which was agreement. Roman stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building and understood that the thing he'd been trying to manage carefully and at a distance had just collapsed the distance entirely. Damien wasn't waiting for Roman to finish building his case. Damien was already moving. He went to Ivy's door and knocked twice, the way you knock when you're trying not to wake a sleeping child. She opened it with the chain still on, looked at him through the gap with those careful, exhausted eyes. Then she unhooked the chain and let him in. The inside of her home was small and very clean and smelled like the shop. Flowers and green things, and something domestic underneath, coffee and warm wood. There were drawings on the refrigerator held up with small magnets. A pair of red sneakers by the door, one right side up and one on its side. Ivy had her arms folded and she was looking at him with an expression that had run out of room for any more surprises and was operating now on pure, stripped-down pragmatism. "Tell me what's happening," she said. He told her about Damien's call. He told her about the property across the street. He told her about the person Marcus had found evidence of in the building's side entrance. He kept it factual, and he kept it brief, and he watched her face process each piece of information with that same careful, checking attention she'd given the financial record. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's been watching this street, most likely. For how long? I don't know yet. But potentially," she stopped, her jaw worked. "Potentially since before you showed up." "Yes," she breathed, long and slow and controlled. So he already knew about Lena. The word sat in the room. "Probably," Roman said. "And you think he's going to—" "I don't know what he's going to do. What I know is that his next move was going to be something, and I've now moved in a way he didn't expect, which means his timeline changed." He looked at her directly. "I need you and Lena to not be here tomorrow." "Where are we supposed to go?" "I have a place. Outside the city. It's not connected to anything with my name on it. It's in Marcus's name. It's clean. You'd have privacy. You'd have space for Lena. You want me to take my daughter to a safe house. I want you to be somewhere that isn't this address." "Roman," her voice was flat. "I've been alone in this city for 4 years. I have a business here. I have a life here. Lena has her routine. She has Mrs. Patterson. She has—" "I know." He said it quietly. "I know what I'm asking." "Do you?" She wasn't angry now. She was something harder than angry. Something that had been refined by years of doing everything alone into a kind of cold, self-sufficient fury. "Because you walked in here 3 days ago, and in 3 days you've managed to destabilize every safe thing I built. And now you're telling me to pick up my daughter in the middle of the night and go somewhere I've never been because your brother, who apparently already knew we existed and chose not to act, has suddenly decided to act." "He's not choosing to act against you," Roman said. "He's choosing to act against me. You're the mechanism." "That's worse." "Yes," he said. "It is." Another silence. In the back of the apartment, through the closed door, there was the sound of a small person shifting in sleep. Some unconscious movement, a soft sound, and then quiet again. Both of them held still for a moment, listening to it. Ivy dropped her arms. She pressed one hand against her mouth briefly, not crying, not close to it, but in the gesture of someone containing something large and unwilling with the only tools they have available. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "not tonight. In the morning, after Lena wakes up naturally, after she has breakfast. She does not get pulled out of bed in the dark." "Agreed. And I need to be able to reach Mrs. Patterson. The woman has my emergency contacts, and if I vanish without telling her, she'll call the police. Call her from the road. Tell her you're taking a family trip." Ivy looked at him. Something flickered across her face at the word family, something complicated and unresolved, but she didn't address it directly. "Where are you going tonight?" she said. "To meet my brother." Her eyes sharpened. "That's what he wants." "I know." "Then why—" "Because I need to know what he thinks he has," Roman said. "He said something on the call. He said she's not what you think she is." Ivy went very still. "He was talking about you," Roman said. "Or he wanted me to think he was. What does that mean?" "I don't know yet." He watched her face. "Is there anything from your past, before Savannah, before us, that Damien could have found and shaped into something that would make me doubt you?" The question landed hard. He saw it land. Ivy's expression went through something. Not guilt, not quite, but a specific quality of discomfort that was different from the controlled wariness she'd been wearing all night. "There are things," she said carefully, "from before, things that look a certain way out of context. Tell me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down at the small kitchen table and he sat across from her and she told him. Her father, a man she had not spoken to in 11 years, had been peripherally involved in financial fraud connected to a property development scheme in Baltimore. She had been 19. She had not known the full scope of it, but she had signed 2 documents at her father's request that had later appeared in the investigation. She had been interviewed, cleared, never charged. But the record existed. Her name, her signature, a document connected to a financial crime, however tangentially. Damien could use that, Roman said. He could make it look like more than it was, Ivy said. He could make it look like I was running a con, that I targeted you specifically, that our entire relationship was... She stopped. Her voice had stayed controlled, but the last few words had a quality he recognized. The sound of something that had been thought about before, in darker moments, in the privacy of sleepless nights. You didn't, Roman said. I know I didn't. Ivy. I know. She met his eyes. But I also know how those documents look if someone with resources decides to frame them a certain way. And I know what your brother is capable of if he thinks it's useful. Roman sat with that. He thought about Damien on the phone, smooth and careful, saying she's not what you think she is. Thought about the way that sentence was engineered. Not to make a direct accusation, but to plant a seed, to introduce the specific kind of doubt that a man in Roman's position, a man who had already been deceived once, would find hardest to shake. It was good. He had to admit it was good. If Roman hadn't had the conversation he just had with Ivy, if he'd walked into that meeting without knowing about Baltimore, then Damien could have presented those documents and watched Roman's certainty crack at exactly the right moment. But he knew now, which changed the shape of the meeting entirely. Get some sleep, he said. Lock both doors. Marcus will be on the street until I'm back. And if you don't come back, Ivy said, not dramatically, just as a practical question from a woman who was used to calculating for outcomes. Marcus has instructions, he said. He'll get you and Lena out. She nodded. It was a small nod, the kind that doesn't indicate comfort, only acknowledgement. He left. The drive to Skidaway took 22 minutes. Marcus drove and Cole rode in the back and no one spoke much. The property was on the island's quieter north end, down a private road that had the specific darkness of somewhere that didn't want to be found easily. The trees on both sides heavy and close, and the Spanish moss hanging low enough in places that it brushed the roof of the car. The house was large and old and lit from inside with the kind of warm light that was meant to look comfortable. Roman had been in enough rooms designed to look comfortable to know the difference between that and comfort. Damien was waiting on the porch. He looked the way he always looked, put together, unhurried, wearing the ease of a man who believes the situation is under his control. He was a year and a half older than Roman, an inch shorter, and he had their father's jaw and their mother's coloring in a combination that had always struck people as handsome in a way they couldn't quite specify. He had a glass in his hand. Something amber. You brought people, he said, looking at Marcus and Cole. You said I could. I did. He smiled. It didn't reach anything. Come inside. The interior was furnished in the style of old coastal money, heavy wood, good rugs, art on the walls that had been bought to convey taste rather than because anyone felt anything looking at it. There was a table with food on it, as promised. Neither Roman nor his men moved toward it. Damien sat. Roman stayed standing. You look tired, Damien said. Show me what you brought me here to show me. Damien looked at him for a moment with something in his eyes that was almost, not quite, regret. Then he set down his glass and reached for a folder on the table beside him, and opened it and slid it across to Roman. Roman looked at the top document. It was a financial record, but not the one he'd found. This was different, newer, actually, with dates that were only 2 years old. An account and a name Roman didn't recognize, receiving regular transfers from a shell company that, when he turned to the second page and saw the ownership chain, ultimately connected back to a property management firm in Baltimore. The third page was a communications record, emails. The account they came from used a name he didn't recognize, but the address they went to was one he did. It was the email address Ivy had given him 2 days ago, when she'd written it on the back of a business card so he could contact her without coming to the shop. Roman's breathing stayed even. He was very practiced at keeping his breathing even. She's been receiving money, Damien said. His voice had lost all the performance now. It was direct, almost gentle, the way someone sounds when they believe they're delivering genuine bad news. For 2 years. From people I've been tracking as part of a separate situation. People who have an interest in the Mercer organization, specifically in the succession question. They needed information about you, about your habits, your vulnerabilities, your... Stop, Roman said. Roman. I said stop. He looked up from the folder. When did you have these made? A pause. Excuse me. These documents, when did you have them made? Damien's expression shifted. Something tightened underneath the careful surface. I didn't have them made. I found them in the course of... The email address on this communication record, Roman said, is one Ivy gave me 2 days ago. It does not exist anywhere in any record that predates 2 days ago, because she wrote it on the back of a card with a pen in front of me. So whatever these emails are connected to, they were not sent to this address prior to 2 days ago. Silence. The address could have been in use under a... Stop, Roman said again, quieter this time. Just stop. Damien stopped. The room was very still. Marcus and Cole were near the door, and they hadn't moved, and the whole space had the quality of a held breath. Roman closed the folder, set it back on the table, looked at his brother. You had 2 days to build this, he said, which means you had the infrastructure for it already, which means you've been building contingency documents on Ivy for longer than 2 days. You just needed to activate them with a current detail to make them look recent. Damien looked at him, and for the first time in Roman's memory, his brother had nothing immediate to say. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Damien sat back in his chair and picked up his glass again and looked at the far wall with the expression of a man revising something. You're smarter than Dad gave you credit for, Damien said. He gave me a lot of credit. In some areas. A pause. Not in the area of what you were willing to do to protect what's yours. He always thought that was your weakness. I used to disagree with him. He looked back at Roman. I don't anymore. Where's the real file? Roman said. The one on me. The one where you've documented enough to make it look like I'm running an unauthorized operation down here that threatens the current leadership of the organization. Because that's the other move. You don't just discredit Ivy, you move to have me removed. What's the filing structure on that one? Damien smiled. It was the first genuine expression he'd worn since Roman walked in. Not warm, not comfortable, but real. The smile of someone who has been in a game long enough to appreciate when the other person is actually playing. 3 weeks, Damien said. I had 3 weeks before I needed to move on it. You've compressed that somewhat by being here. Where is it filed? Safe places. Damien. Roman. The smile faded. His voice went flat and direct in the way it got when he stopped performing entirely. You found the girl. That changes the math. I understand that. But you need to understand something too. The organization doesn't stop because you have feelings about a woman in a flower shop. There are 47 people whose livelihoods depend on what we control. There are arrangements with 6 separate networks that require continuity of leadership. If you blow this up because you want to play father, I'm not playing anything, Roman said. You're going to destroy 40 years of structure. I'm going to dismantle 40 years of structure, Roman said. That's different. One is accidental, the other is a choice. Damien stared at him. You're serious, he said. I've been talking to a federal attorney for 2 days. She's building a documentation package. I came here tonight to see if there was a version of this where you cooperated, where you gave me something that reduced what you're facing. That's the only reason I came. The temperature in the room changed. Damien's face went through something. Not fear exactly, but a recalculation, fast and visible. The kind of rapid internal adjustment that only shows on a person's face when they're genuinely surprised by the size of what they're looking at. You'd burn yourself too, Damien said. Yes. Your name is in those records, same as mine. I know. You'd go to prison. Potentially. Roman looked at him steadily. I've had 4 days to think about what I'm willing to accept. You've had 5 years of thinking my answer to that question was the same as it's always been. It's not. Damien set his glass down. He stood up slowly, straightening his jacket, and in the movement there was something Roman recognized. The shift from conversation mode to something else. Some other kind of calculation. "I need you to understand something," Damien said quietly, "before you drive back to that inn and make any calls. I need you to understand that I have people in this city who have been here longer than you have and who are considerably more motivated by continuity than you are right now. And I need you to understand that the flower shop on Whitaker Street has been under a specific kind of observation for several months, not because I intended anything, as insurance." Roman went very still. "If I make a call in the next 20 minutes, Damien said, certain things change. Certain protections that have existed without Ivy knowing they existed cease to exist." He paused. "I don't want to make that call. I want to sit back down and find a way through this that doesn't require anyone to get hurt, but I need you to hear me when I tell you that I am willing to make it." Roman looked at his brother across the width of a room full of heavy furniture and bad light, and 5 years of carefully constructed damage, and he understood that the thing he'd been most afraid of since he saw the second-floor light go dark across from the flower shop had just been confirmed. He had not gotten here in time. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He didn't look at it, kept his eyes on Damien. It buzzed again. Then Marcus's phone buzzed. Marcus looked at his screen and his face changed in the small specific way it changed when something required immediate action, and he looked at Roman and said 2 words. "The shop." Roman looked at Marcus for exactly 1 second. Then he was moving. Roman hit the door of the Skidaway house at a dead run. Behind him he heard Damien say something, a word, maybe a name, the beginning of an instruction to someone. And then Marcus was beside him, and Cole had the car running before they reached the end of the porch steps, and the 3 of them were moving with the specific compressed efficiency of men who have had to move fast in bad situations before and know that talking costs seconds they don't have. The car was on the private road before Roman had his door fully shut. "What happened?" Roman said. Marcus had his phone to his ear. Trey was watching the back. He heard breaking glass from the alley side, went to check, and the front door was already... He stopped, listening. Then, "She's not in the apartment. Neither is the kid." Roman's chest did something he didn't have a word for. "The shop," he said. "Trey's there now. Shop's dark. Door's intact. Alley entrance to the apartment is open." "She ran," Cole said from the front. Not a question. Roman looked at his phone. No calls from Ivy. He dialed her and it rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and the sound of her recorded voice, professional, slightly clipped, the flower shop greeting, hit him somewhere specific and unpleasant. "She went out the back," Roman said. He was thinking out loud, working through it. "She heard something and she didn't call me. She just took Lena and went. Which means she had a plan. She had somewhere to go." "Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said, 2 doors down. Roman remembered Ivy mentioning it, the retired schoolteacher with the emergency contacts. "Address," Roman said. Marcus was already pulling it. 41 Whitaker, same block. "Go there first." Cole adjusted without being told. The car came off Skidaway's private road and hit the main bridge doing 15 over what it should have been doing, and nobody mentioned it. Roman kept dialing Ivy. 3rd call, 4th. Each one went to voicemail, and each one deposited a small, precise quantity of adrenaline into his bloodstream that he did not allow to become panic, because panic was not useful. And Lena was 4 years old, and somewhere on a street in Savannah, in the middle of the night, and the part of him that had been built for exactly this kind of operational extremity needed to be the part that was running right now. The 5th call connected. Not voicemail, a live connection. No voice. "Ivy," he said. Breathing, fast and shallow, the kind of breathing you do when you're moving, and you're scared and you're trying to be quiet about both. "I'm here," she said, very low. Almost nothing. "Where?" "I don't know the street name. We went through the alley and then left, and there's a pause. The sound of Lena's voice, very small, saying something Roman couldn't make out, and Ivy's hand going over the phone for a moment, muffling it. Then she was back. "There's a parking structure on the corner, 3 levels. We're on the 2nd level." "Stay there. Don't move. What color is the structure?" "Gray. Old concrete." There's a CVS on the ground floor, I think. I know it, Cole said from the front. We're 4 minutes out, Roman said into the phone. Stay on the line. Don't hang up. There was someone in the alley, Ivy said. Her voice was controlled, but he could hear what was underneath it. The specific vibration of someone who is holding themselves together by will alone. When I heard the glass, I looked out the window, and there was someone in the alley with a flashlight going along the back of the building. I didn't wait to see if they were coming up. You did right. Lena thinks we're playing a game. Something moved through Roman's chest that he pressed flat immediately. Keep her thinking that. She wants to know if the man with dark eyes is going to find us. He closed his eyes for half a second, opened them. Tell her yes, he said. Tell her that's exactly what he's doing. The parking structure was on Drayton, 3 blocks east of Whitaker, and Cole had the car into the entrance before Roman finished the sentence. Second level. Roman was out of the moving car, Cole still slowing, and running up the ramp before the wheels fully stopped. He found them in the far northeast corner of the second level, tucked between a concrete pillar and the wheel well of a parked truck. Ivy was crouching with her back against the pillar, and Lena was pressed into her side with her arms around Ivy's waist and her face hidden in Ivy's shirt. And in Ivy's right hand there was a can of pepper spray that she'd had the presence to grab on her way out, and she had it raised at the sound of his footsteps until she saw his face. She lowered her arm. They looked at each other for a second that had more inside it than Roman could process while moving. Then he crouched down to Lena's level. Lena turned her face out from Ivy's shirt and looked at him. Her eyes were wide and her hair was completely destroyed, and she had one sock on and one bare foot, and she was shaking slightly with the specific full-body tremble of a child who has been frightened but is doing her best to be brave about it. She looked at him for one long moment. Then she reached out and grabbed the front of his jacket with both fists and held on. Roman put one hand on the back of her head and let her hold. We need to move, Marcus said behind him. I know. He looked at Ivy over Lena's head. Can she walk, or do you need me to? I've got her. Ivy was already standing, shifting Lena to her hip despite the fact that Lena was arguably too old and too heavy for this, and Lena locked her legs around Ivy's waist and her arms around Ivy's neck, and Ivy carried her without adjusting, without flinching, with the automatic ease of a woman who has been doing this since the beginning. They got to the car. Cole had it facing out. Marcus got in the front and Roman got in the back with Ivy and Lena, and the door wasn't fully shut before Cole had them moving. Lena had migrated from Ivy's lap to the space between them on the seat, pressed against Roman's side with one hand still fisted in his jacket, like she hadn't decided yet whether to let go. Roman did not move away from the contact. He sat with it and kept his eyes on the street ahead and let her hold what she needed to hold. Ivy was looking at her phone. What's happening? She said. Her voice was quiet, and the question was directed at Roman, and it carried everything once. Not just what happened tonight, but what happens now. What do we do with this? Where does this go? Damien made his move when Roman said. Tonight was him. Tonight was a message. He wanted to show me he could reach you. Roman looked out the window. The city was moving past in that particular nighttime way, sparse and amber-lit and strangely still. He miscalculated. How? He expected me to come back from that meeting and have a conversation about terms. He expected the fact that he could reach you to be a negotiating tool. Roman's voice stayed flat. He doesn't understand yet that it isn't. Ivy looked at him. What do you mean? I mean, he gave me a choice tonight that he thought was between protecting you and dismantling him, and he expected me to choose protecting you through compliance. He paused. He's wrong about what protecting you looks like from where I'm standing. A silence. Roman, her voice had gone careful. What are you going to do? He didn't answer right away. He looked at Lena, who had relaxed slightly in the last few minutes. The shaking had mostly stopped, and she was leaning against him with the heavy, unself-conscious weight of a tired child who has decided that the immediate crisis is over and sleep is now a reasonable option. I'm going to end it, he said. Elaine picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she'd been expecting the call. The documentation, Roman said. How much of it is complete? 70%. The property chains are done. The financial structure is done. The criminal conduct records back to what's missing. The communication logs, the ones that show the internal decision-making, who authorized what, when, the chain of command for specific operations. Without those, it's prosecutable but less airtight. They'll fight it. Give me until morning, Roman said. Roman, I know where those logs are. Give me until morning. He hung up. They took Ivy and Lena to a property outside the city. Not the one Marcus's name was on, a different one. A rented house in a quiet neighborhood in Garden City that had been arranged through 3 layers of transaction and was connected to nothing with any Mercer-related fingerprint on it. Cole stayed with them. Roman gave Ivy his second phone, the clean one, the one only Marcus had the number for, and told her to use it for any calls and to keep the GPS off on everything else. She stood in the doorway of the rented house and looked at him, and he could see her working through something, some internal argument she was having with herself about what to say. Come back, she said finally. Just that. He nodded. He left before she could say anything else, because if she said anything else, he was going to stand in that doorway longer than he could afford to. The drive back into the city took 18 minutes. Marcus drove and Roman spent 12 of those minutes on the phone with a contact he hadn't used in 3 years. A man named Greer, who had spent 22 years inside the federal framework that oversaw organized crime prosecution and who now operated as an independent consultant of a particular and unofficial variety. Roman told Greer what he had and what he needed, and Greer told him the timeline, and Roman told him to move it up. How far up? Greer said. 12 hours. A pause. That's not a lot of runway for something this size. 12 hours, Roman said again. The documentation package goes to your contact at the field office at 6 a.m., and they move on it by noon or the whole thing falls apart. What happens at noon? Someone gets hurt, Roman said. Someone I need to keep from getting hurt. Another pause. You understand that once this package goes in, you're in it too. I know. Your name on multiple Greer? He said it quietly. I know what I'm doing. He hung up and looked at the city going past the window, the dark stretches between streetlights, the old, beautiful bones of Savannah laid out in its grid of squares and trees and history. And he thought about Damien sitting in that skidaway house after Roman had walked out, the calculation he'd be running, the calls he'd be making, the reorganization of his strategy that would have started the moment Roman was out the door. Damien would move quickly now. He'd know the meeting hadn't produced compliance. He'd know Roman wasn't going to negotiate, which meant his next action would not be another message. It would be something final and definitive, something designed to remove Roman's ability to do what he was doing. The communication logs were at the estate property. Roman knew this because he knew Damien, had grown up watching him, had understood for years before he admitted it to himself what Damien was and what Damien was capable of. And Damien was a man who kept his records close, not digitally archived in some external server he didn't control, not distributed across multiple locations in a way that required trusting other people. Damien kept his operational records in physical form, in a specific room in a specific building, because he was old-fashioned in exactly this one way, and because he believed his personal security was more reliable than any network. The estate property on Skidaway, where Roman had sat across from him less than 2 hours ago. We're going back, Roman told Marcus. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. Then, how many people does he have there? Tonight? After that conversation? More than before. Roman thought through it. But he won't be there himself. He'll have moved already. He knows I know the address now. He won't sit in a location I can find easily. He'll have people there to clean the records out and then burn the location. So we're racing his cleanup crew. Yes. Roman. Marcus's voice was the careful version again. If his people are there pulling records, they're not going to be happy to see us. I know. Cole's with the women. It's just us. I know, Roman said again. Drive faster. They came off the Skidaway Bridge at speed, and Marcus cut the headlights 200 yards from the private road entrance, and they covered the rest of it by the ambient light of a Georgia night that was too overcast for stars but carried enough reflected glow from the surrounding water to see by, barely, at low speed. The house was lit differently than before. Before it had been the warm, managed lighting of a place expecting company. Now there were lights on in the back rooms, and the side door was open, and through the trees Roman could see movement. Two figures, maybe three, moving with purpose between the side entrance and what looked like a vehicle parked in the rear. Marcus stopped the car on the grass verge off the road. Both men got out without slamming doors. Roman moved through the tree line along the north side of the property. The ground was soft from recent rain, and his shoes found the wet patches before his eyes did, and he made more noise than he wanted to, but not enough to carry over the sound of the men at the side door, who were talking to each other in the low, functional tones of people doing a job on a timeline. He could see the vehicle now. A dark SUV, rear hatch open, one man loading boxes. A second man at the side door passing things out. A third somewhere inside. Roman could see his silhouette moving past a lit window. Three men. The two outside were positioned badly for him alone. If he approached from the tree line, he'd be visible to both before he reached either of them. And he had no firearm, which he was now regretting with the specific regret of someone who had decided an hour ago that tonight was a conversation and not an operation. Then Marcus appeared at the far side of the vehicle, from the south tree line, and Roman understood that they'd split without discussing it, which was the kind of thing that happened between people who had done enough of this together that discussion became redundant. Roman moved. He came out of the tree line at the moment Marcus reached the man loading boxes, and the next 30 seconds were not clean or organized or anything like the way violence looks in rooms where people plan it carefully. It was fast and physical, and the man coming out of the side door with a second box had time to drop it and reach for something at his hip before Roman closed the distance, and the reach became unnecessary, and the sounds of it were dull and functional, and the kind that don't carry far on a night with enough wind. The third man inside heard something. He came through the side door fast, not running but alert, and he stopped when he saw Roman standing in the pool of light from the open door, and his hand went to the same place the second man's hand had gone, and this time he had time to complete the motion. Roman heard the shot before he fully registered the man's intent. The sound was enormous in the still air of the property, big and flat and final sounding, and it was followed immediately by the particular quality of silence that comes after a gunshot outdoors, that brief, complete absence of other sound as everything nearby stops. Roman felt the impact at his left side, below the ribs, and the immediate sensation was not pain, but heat and a wrong feeling in his breathing, some new and incorrect quality to the air moving in and out of him. And he registered those things and kept moving anyway because stopping was worse. He hit the man at the door with enough momentum to take them both through the open entrance and into the narrow hallway beyond. And on the floor of that hallway with the man's weapon no longer in his hand and his own body doing something complicated and unhelpful, with the blood that was now making itself known through his shirt, Roman understood that he had about a functional window of maybe 20 minutes before the blood loss became a logistical problem. He used the first 5 of those minutes finding the room. It was at the back of the house, behind a door that required a key he didn't have, which required him to use the door differently, and behind it were 4 steel filing drawers and 2 shelving units with labeled binders and a laptop on a desk that was still open and still on, showing a file management system with a directory that had 15 years of organizational depth. He took the laptop. He took the top 2 drawers of documents, the ones labeled with the most recent years. And he left the rest because he couldn't carry more and because Elaine had said the recent records were what would make the case airtight. Marcus met him at the side door. Marcus looked at Roman's left side, and his expression did the thing it did when something was bad, and he was not going to waste time saying so. "Car," Marcus said. "The documents first." "Roman." "The documents go in the car first," Roman said, and his voice came out more uneven than he'd intended, some quality in it that didn't usually live there, and Marcus took the materials from him without arguing further, and they went to the car. Roman sat in the passenger seat and pressed his right hand against his left side and looked at the house through the windshield while Marcus drove and thought about Elaine's 6 a.m. deadline and the distance between now and then, and whether the window was still achievable. "Hospital," Marcus said. "Field office first." "Roman, you're field office." He said it with everything he had. "I need to be in that building when the package lands. I need to be the one who hands it over. If I go in after the fact, they can argue I wasn't cooperative, that it was—" He stopped, breathed. The breathing was still wrong and getting more wrong in a way that required deliberate management. I need to be there when it opens. 6 a.m. It's 3:40 now. Marcus drove and said nothing else about the hospital. They reached the FBI field office on Bull Street at 5:58. Roman got out of the car under his own power. He was wearing his jacket zipped to the collar, and his right hand was inside it, pressed flat below his ribs, and he walked the 14 steps from the curb to the entrance the way he'd walked into every room in his adult life. Straight and deliberate and without visible concession to whatever his body was doing. Greer was waiting inside with a woman in a dark suit who had the specific expression of someone who has been awake all night and has seen enough that nothing surprises her anymore, but who is still, despite that, slightly surprised by the sight of Roman Mercer walking through the door of a federal building at 6 in the morning with a laptop under one arm and blood on his jacket. Roman set the materials on the desk. He told her what was on the laptop and what was in the documents and what Elaine's package contained and where the remaining physical records on Skidaway could be found before Damien's people finished removing them. And he gave her Damien's location, the secondary property, the one Damien would have moved to after the Skidaway meeting, the one Roman had known about since the third day of his investigation and had not yet used because he'd hoped there was a version of this that didn't require federal intervention. There wasn't. The woman in the dark suit asked him several questions, and he answered all of them, and his answers were precise and complete and did not omit the parts that reflected badly on himself. When she was done, she looked at him for a moment with that expression, the not quite surprised one. "You understand you're implicating yourself in several of these activities," she said. "Yes," Roman said, "that this conversation is being recorded." "Yes." "And you're proceeding?" "Yes," he said. She nodded, turned to speak to someone behind her. Roman sat down in the chair against the wall. He did it carefully, managing the mechanics of it with more attention than sitting usually required, and he leaned back against the wall and looked at the ceiling of the federal building in Savannah, Georgia, at 6:03 in the morning. Marcus crouched beside the chair and looked at him. "Now hospital," Marcus said. Roman thought about Ivy in the Garden City house with Cole outside and his clean phone on the kitchen table. He thought about Lena asleep in an unfamiliar room in one sock and one bare foot, still somehow unafraid of the world in the fundamental way that 4-year-olds are, the way that doesn't know yet to account for everything a 4-year-old ought to be afraid of. He thought about the locket around her neck. "Yeah," he said. "Now hospital." He stood up and Marcus was there, and they walked back out through the door into the Savannah morning, which was just beginning to come in gray and quiet over the rooftops of the old city, and somewhere across town in a secondary property that was about to become very busy with people in dark suits, Damien Mercer was about to find out what happened when you built an entire architecture of control on the assumption that the person you were controlling would never choose to burn himself down along with everything else. He had been wrong about Roman's weakness. He had been wrong about what Roman was willing to lose. And in approximately 45 minutes, when the first federal vehicles turned onto the street where Damien's secondary property sat, he was going to understand exactly how wrong, and there was not going to be anything left to do with that understanding except live inside it for a very long time. Roman reached the sidewalk. The morning air hit his face, cool and salt-edged off the water. He was still standing. For now, that was enough.